a vision of victories that are possible, not constantly reminding them of injuries to be avoided.
Facts, bro.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You say you don't support reparations. You say you don't support reparations. Why not?
Not everybody suffered equally. I mean, when you go into slavery, it's much more complex than white people were the oppressors and black people were the victims. If you dissect it, you will find there were about 3,700 free blacks who owned 12,000 slaves, black slaves. The question is, do the descendants of those free blacks who owned black slaves, do they pay? Blacks really
That's actually a really good point, man. If you really think about it, let's say they were to give reparations and they were saying, oh, all black people are getting this amount of money. What about the black families whose families did own slaves? Would they also get money? You're basically rewarding them for that behavior. Or what about the white families who didn't own slaves and who are also punished? So, and this is a civil rights activist saying this regarding reparations. So, if you really think about it, like critically consider reparations, it would be almost impossible to give them out because you don't even know who suffered equally. You don't know which family suffered the most. You don't know. So how would you do it?
benefited more the first 100 years after slavery we have in the last 50 years. I was born in 1937 during the Depression. Everyone in my small, low-income black community, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk safely in that community without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. Never heard a gunfire during that time. Never heard of a child being shot to death in the crib. But there are 50 children today who have been shot and killed in our cities. If you're talking about remedies, we've got to look beyond saying that every solution has to have a winner and a loser, that blacks can only benefit if whites lose. We have to be defined more than just victims of oppression.
Bro, this guy is speaking. This guy is on some other stuff, man. This is one smart dude. I like one thing he said, that it doesn't always have to be a winner and a loser. And that makes perfect sense, because just because we want a certain lifestyle doesn't mean other people have to suffer for it or have to get punished for it, in a sense. Because if you really think about it, it's like I keep saying, it's the same side of it's a different side of the same coin. If we were to say we're getting reparations and we're taking them from white people, what about the white families who genuinely had their history of family had nothing to do with that? You're just punishing everyone equally. How is that any different from back then when they just sent all blacks to a certain type of lifestyle too? It's all I'm saying is it's better ways to approach things, and it doesn't always have to be somebody getting punished in the process. And this is from a civil rights activist. He's lived through way more experiences.
When whites were at their worst, blacks were at their best. When we were denied access to hotels, we built our own. We have to communicate to our people the history of how they achieved in the face of oppression. But if we continue to sit back and say, all of the challenges that we face in out-of-wedlock births of violence, that somehow the control of that is in the hands of white America. And therefore, until white people change, there's nothing that we can do.
I hate that.
This sets up a terrible situation for this nation. The big crisis.
And I hear that so much, man. I hear that so much. If you go on social media and you try to talk about, if you're black, I don't know if you're black, but me as a young black man, I see a lot of the issues in our community. Like, I see, like, our marriage rates are dropping. You can argue that people don't want to get married, whatever. If they don't want to get married, you don't want to get married. But if you want to get married, that's fine. I mean, then that's a real issue. Our marriage rates are dropping terribly. Our people who have children out of wedlock are way higher. Bro, every time you even bring up an issue regarding our communities or our culture, it's always pans back to a different race. Like, what does another race have to do with our cultural problems? Of course, there are systemic barriers that could be affecting the African American community. Of course, it's a possibility. No doubt. But all I'm saying is, if you're waiting on another race to solve your community's problems, you've already lost. It's like if you're trying to get a job, and you're like, well, I can't even apply to the job because somebody said something mean about me, so I can't apply to the job until they apologize to me. Somebody said I was dumb, so I can't apply to the job. Or you trying to make a basketball team, like, well, I can't make the team because somebody's sitting in my seat. Like, bro, all I'm trying to say is, if you're waiting on someone else to do something before you even consider solving your own problems, you've already lost. The game is already over because your mindset is messed up.
Crisis facing America is not racial. It is a moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming our children. The highest death rate among black families is homicide. Among Silicon Valley, the highest level of suicide, 6 times the national average. In Appalachia, there are prescription drugs. And so if we are to address this crisis that is causing our children to lack a sense of personal responsibility.
And I see her face, bro. It's just a look of indifference on her face. Like, I don't know if that's if I'm right, because I'm just reading her body language, but just based off of how she looks, she doesn't look very convinced at all. It looks like she's about to rebuttal what he's saying. Let's see what happens.
Or value for their own life, they will take their own life or take someone else's. So in order to address that, we must come together and look beyond race and realize America is drowning because it's in a moral and spiritual freefall. None of us should be defined by the worst of what we were in the past, but we should be defined by what we want to become in the future, and that people are motivated to change when you give them a vision of victories that are possible, not constantly reminding them of injuries to be avoided.
Facts, bro.
I think it's not either or, I think it's and. I think we can do both. We cannot ignore.
And that, I knew it. I knew it, man. I knew it. She said, I don't think it's either or, I think it's and. I think we can do both. But the problem with that statement is if you're focused on how another community or another group of people is harming your group, of harming you, let's say it's harming you, rather than how you are harming you, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because at the end of the day, if you really want to control anything, you can control yourself, you can control your family. So if you're focused on another group of people and how they are just destroying you, but you're not looking inward how, maybe I'm destroying myself, you're going to fail. You can't even, you can't hold your self-control to the same standard of how other people treat you. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard. If our community was doing everything we could, to succeed, and we were still getting held back, then that's a completely different story. But if he just said the leading cause of death is homicide, in the black community, if our wedlock is up, if our marriage rates are down, what is focusing on another race going to do? Those are real issues. If we focus on our issues and then we fix them and we were still in a bad place, it's a whole different discussion. But it's not. That's not the case.
Nor the reality of systemic racism and how it's affected the black community. You can't just be like, we need to just focus on our own issues. The violence is happening in the black community, it's the black people's fault, and we need to focus on that. Actually, it's a lot of things. So we can't just separate them and be like, just focus on yourselves, don't worry about racism. It's finding us.
And the thing about her statement that really annoys me is the fact that this man was born in, 1957? So he actually lived through it. Like, he actually grew up in it. He grew up in Jim Crow. He lived through the life. He knows what it's like. His father or his grandfather was probably a slave. Not his father, but his grandfather was more than likely an actual slave. His father probably wasn't even allowed to go to desegregated schools. So all I'm saying is, you're telling a man who actually studied this, he's a civil rights activist, and he's an older man who older black man who lived through it that he's wrong about this issue. This is the problem. This is the problem, man. A young woman probably hasn't lived through half the stuff he has, saying that he's wrong about reparations, even though it would be almost impossible to even give them for real because you don't even know which families, but that's a different discussion. This is the problem, man. We ignore our own issues. We ignore our issues and be like, you know what? It's not our fault this happened. It might not be our fault, but it's our responsibility.
It finds us wherever we go. It's not our fault, right? So what you're saying is we need to focus our issues on ourselves and not wait for this. No, we can do both. We can get reparations and we can work on issues within our community as we have always been doing. But
No, we haven't. We haven't always been doing it because we are... Bruh. Okay, let me just finish this out.
The barriers that are there that shouldn't be there.
Do you have a story or a question?
All right, that's it, man. It's like she just ignored everything he said, even though he lived through it, even though the numbers are on his side. She just ignored it all. And this is the problem I have, man. The fact that you're ignoring... If you have any suggestions, comment them down below. Leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all later.